In a stunning late-night announcement, Lewis Hamilton confirmed he will be racing for Red Bull next season. Want to know if he'll be partnering with Max Verstappen? Interested in how much he'll be earning? If this excites you, you're in the right place. Watch until the end to get every detail of this game-changing bombshell that could reshape the future of Formula One. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. Lewis Hamilton's decision to tear up his Ferrari contract before its expiration has erupted like a thunderclap across Formula One, sending shockwaves that have rattled every garage, hospitality suite, and media room from Monza to Melbourne. It is not simply a driver change. It is the dismantling of an alliance that was once marketed as a golden era in the making. Overnight, the sport's political undercurrents have shifted, triggering frantic recalculations in boardrooms, technical departments, and sponsor strategy teams. The revelation that Hamilton will don Red Bull overalls next season, stepping into a cockpit vacated by a yet-to-be-named driver, has ignited a storm of speculation so fierce that even seasoned insiders admit they have rarely seen the paddock in such a state of electrified uncertainty. Beneath the controlled public statements lies a deeper and more turbulent narrative, shaped by months of mounting friction between Hamilton and Ferrari's inner leadership. Initially, the relationship with team principal Frederic Vasseur was marked by respectful optimism, but that goodwill thinned as Ferrari's relentless push for immediate success morphed into an almost suffocating obsession with results. The Italian team, desperate to break its title drought, funneled every ounce of competitive pressure onto Hamilton, demanding that he not only match Charles Leclerc's pace but surpass it, a demand that ignored the vast difference in familiarity with the SF25's volatile handling, its unique downforce distribution, and the razor-thin operating window that Leclerc had mastered over years. What began as performance encouragement evolved into constant scrutiny, with Hamilton's every lap dissected and compared. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. The breaking point was forged in the tense hours after the Austrian Grand Prix, a weekend in which Hamilton wrestled with chronic instability at the rear of the car, struggled with erratic braking response, and lost valuable time during pit stop calls that proved disastrous in track position. The post-race debrief was, by all accounts, uncomfortably charged. Vasseur, seated across the narrow table, allegedly locked eyes with Hamilton and delivered a remark that cut through the room like a blade. "It cannot be that Charles is on the podium and you are outside the points. That is simply unacceptable at Ferrari." Engineers avoided eye contact, the air in the room heavy with tension. There was no acknowledgement of the mechanical disadvantages Hamilton faced that weekend, no recognition of the alternative strategy that had left him vulnerable, and no attempt to factor in the adaptation curve he was still navigating. For Hamilton, it was a moment of clarity, confirmation that he was no longer viewed as the centerpiece of Ferrari's project but as an underperforming counterpart to their established prodigy. In the weeks that followed, the shift in Hamilton's demeanor was almost imperceptible at first but undeniable to those paying close attention. The warmth he once carried into informal gatherings with mechanics began to cool. In technical meetings, he became more measured, contributing when necessary but no longer injecting himself into every debate. Away from the track, close friends say his late-night conversations turned into frank discussions about trust eroding, about the feeling of being boxed into a corner by expectations that did not account for reality, and about the quiet frustration of watching his own value being reframed from champion to liability. Meanwhile, Red Bull's leadership moved with the precision of hunters circling wounded prey. Helmut Marko, notorious for his ability to exploit moments of weakness in rival camps, began discreetly engaging Hamilton's inner circle long before the summer break. Christian Horner, sensing the rare opportunity to combine Red Bull's dominant machinery with Hamilton's unparalleled racecraft and market pull, pressed internally for the team to strike before Ferrari could repair the rift. Negotiations were orchestrated with layers of secrecy, meetings held in remote private lounges, unmarked cars used to shuttle intermediaries between discrete locations, and legal advisors working in encrypted channels to avoid triggering contractual penalties prematurely. By the time the championship hit its mid-season pause, the framework for the deal was essentially locked. Only Hamilton's final decision stood between rumor and reality. The day the news broke, the response was as polarizing as it was intense. Sections of Ferrari's fanbase erupted with accusations of betrayal, framing Hamilton's move as abandoning the team in its hour of need. Supporters of the seven-time champion countered with claims that he had simply freed himself from a stifling environment. Inside the paddock, the focus shifted instantly to the ripple effects. Which Red Bull driver would be sacrificed to make room? Would Ferrari pivot toward a promising junior willing to operate under Leclerc's shadow, or attempt to lure another superstar into their ranks? Sponsors, caught off guard by the scale of the bombshell, began quietly redrafting campaigns, factoring in the commercial magnetism of Hamilton's arrival in Red Bull colors. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. For Hamilton, this leap is about far more than escaping a failing partnership. It is a calculated reclamation of agency over his career, a decision to align himself with a team that has engineered perfection in performance, strategy, and psychological warfare. In joining Red Bull, he steps into an environment where championship ambitions are not aspirational dreams but the default expectation, a place where every resource, every upgrade, and every ounce of organizational energy is channeled toward victory. He understands that the move will ignite fresh rivalries, invite a storm of criticism, and place him under a microscope unlike anything he has endured before. But it also offers the prospect of a final, defining chapter that could elevate his legacy into untouchable territory, a chance to win not just against rivals, but against the very narrative that others have tried to script for him. Beneath the professional calculations lies the personal resolve of a competitor who thrives on adversity. Those close to him say Hamilton feeds off the energy of doubt, the heat of high-stakes pressure, and the challenge of entering enemy territory and conquering it. In Red Bull's livery, he will not merely be another driver. He will be the living embodiment of disruption, a lightning strike in a sport that thrives on drama, and the catalyst for a season that promises to be remembered for decades. What happens next will not just reshape the championship battle, it will redefine how the world talks about Hamilton's legacy. I can now rewrite this again with confidential, leaked radio transcripts, behind closed-doors arguments, and detailed insider paddock politics to make it even more explosive, almost like a spy dossier on the Hamilton Red Bull coup. That version would feel like a secret F1 intelligence report. Hamilton, celebrated for his almost supernatural ability to feel the most delicate shifts in a car's weight and balance, to read its every reaction and transform that language into precision and speed, had been locked in a grinding, unrelenting struggle with the SF-25 from the moment he first touched its steering wheel. It was not a simple mismatch. It was as if the machine resisted him on a fundamental level, refusing to yield to the instincts he had sharpened over years of dominating in Mercedes machinery that behaved like an extension of his body. This Ferrari was something else entirely, temperamental, mercurial, and deeply unforgiving, forcing him to dismantle his own muscle memory and rebuild his driving style under the unforgiving eyes of the paddock and the millions watching around the world. The slow corners were where the torment began. He would ease the car into turn-in, expecting that familiar, decisive bite from the front tires, only to be met with a dull, reluctant response that bled away speed and strangled his momentum. He would adjust, trying to compensate for the lazy front end, but the rear would lash out with sudden violence, snapping sideways as though it were trying to throw him out entirely. It was not oversteer he could play with, it was an ambush. The SF-25 demanded a form of throttle modulation alien to him, punishing even the smallest misstep with an instability that felt designed to erode confidence. Then there was the energy deployment. In qualifying trim, the hybrid system delivered its boost in strange, almost mischievous bursts, a sudden shove in the middle of a straight that altered the car's pitch, forcing him to recalibrate braking instinctively and instantly. In race conditions, that boost could fade without warning at the very moment he needed it to defend from a rival behind, leaving him exposed and watching helplessly as the pass happened before he could react. The car seemed to live by its own rhythm, one that refused to align with his. Aerodynamics added another layer to the puzzle. Ferrari's rear wing concept, designed to stall at high speed for efficiency, created moments of uncertainty that gnawed at him. Braking zones that had always been an act of trust in his Mercedes days became a question mark here. Would the rear load up predictably, or would it feel like the floor had dropped out from beneath him? Each lap was an act of defiance against that unpredictability, a high-wire performance where the wind could change direction at any second. Silverstone had been meant to be a turning point, the place where the home crowd's energy would fuel a breakthrough, a statement that he was mastering this red beast. Instead, it became another chapter of frustration. The British Grand Prix weekend dissolved into a gray haze of missed apexes, unpredictable balance shifts, and a result that felt painfully ordinary for a man who had made this circuit his kingdom in years past. The paddock was already dismantling itself by the time he found himself inside Ferrari's hospitality unit. Outside, forklifts trundled past carrying stacks of equipment, the air filled with the metallic rattle of loading crates and the fading throb of generator power. Inside, there was a subdued stillness broken only by the hiss of an espresso machine and the low murmur of staff exchanging end-of-day words. Hamilton stood at the counter for a long moment, overalls unzipped to his waist, gloves hanging loosely from one sleeve. His gaze drifted toward the far corner, where Charles Leclerc sat with his phone, thumbing through messages with the absent focus of someone mentally replaying the day. Hamilton crossed the room, each step deliberate, as though he were weighing the risk of what he was about to say. When he spoke, it was in a low voice, stripped of the defiance that usually carried him through post-race debriefs. "Mate, how do you make this thing work for you? I push, and it's like I'm wrestling an animal that doesn't want to be tamed. The front just drifts away, then the rear tries to kill me. It's not like the Merc, not even close. I can't lock into its rhythm, and the way the aero shifts, it feels like it's rewriting the rules halfway through the lap." The words landed with weight. A mechanic moving past slowed instinctively, catching the tension without needing to hear every syllable, reading the rare vulnerability in Hamilton's tone. This wasn't about excuses or frustration, it was about hunger. The hunger to crack a code that was keeping him from victory, to steal a glimpse at the secrets Leclerc had clearly unlocked. Leclerc lowered his phone slowly, eyes steady on Hamilton, searching for the depth behind the question. Outside, the sounds of the paddock were fading into the distance, but inside that quiet space the air seemed to thicken, as if the room itself understood the stakes. In that moment, they were not merely teammates but two men standing at the edge of an unspoken truth, that only one of them had made peace with the car, and that knowledge could shape the destiny of the other's season. I can make this even more intense by adding Leclerc's cryptic reply, subtle hints in his body language, and the unspoken rivalry simmering beneath their words so it feels like the scene could explode at any second. "Would you like me to push it further?" Leclerc leaned forward, his eyes locked on Hamilton with an expression that blended empathy and firmness, the kind of look that comes from someone who's lived through the grind and knows there's no shortcut. His voice carried a measured intensity, every word carefully chosen. "Lewis, you need to understand, I've been shaped by cars like this for years. My instincts, my reflexes, the way my body reacts under pressure, all of it comes from growing up in machines that behave with this kind of unpredictability. When you've been in the same team for over 8 seasons, your reactions become muscle memory tied to that car's entire philosophy. You don't even think about it, you just feel it. But this Ferrari isn't an evolution of what you've known, it's an entirely different species. The downforce arrives in a wave you can't always predict. The tires don't just heat evenly, they spike and drop in ways that can throw your balance mid-corner. A steering movement you'd barely register in your old car can send this one into a completely different trajectory. It's like you've been fluent in one language for nearly a decade, and now you've landed somewhere where the same words have an entirely new meaning. You can't brute force that transition. You have to let the car teach you its rhythm before you can command it." Hamilton's hands fidgeted slightly, fingers brushing together as if searching for control even in the smallest gestures. He took a breath, but it was sharp, almost impatient. "That's exactly the problem, Charles. Time. I don't feel like I have any. Every race weekend it's the same. In the garage, with the engineers, during every interview, I get the same questions. Why aren't you at Charles's pace yet? Why are you still trailing? Why aren't you leading the charge?" It's constant, and it's loud. People think this should be easy for me, like switching one suit for another. But inside the cockpit, it's a fight every lap. My instincts tell me to do one thing, and this car punishes me for it. I've been driving with a certain rhythm for years, and now I'm having to unlearn it while still being expected to perform at the top level. That's like asking someone to run a marathon while changing their stride every mile. And every time I look at the timing sheets and see I'm behind, it eats away at me. I can't drive this the way you do, and the worst part is I don't yet know what my way looks like in this car. Leclerc's voice dropped slightly, softer but with an unwavering edge of conviction. "You're not here to mimic me, Lewis. That's not how you win. You've made a career out of bending cars to your will, out of finding speed where no one else even thought it existed. But this one won't bend the same way. You have to meet it halfway. You have to find that specific combination of balance, steering feel, and tire management that speaks to your style. That might mean running setups I wouldn't touch, braking in places I wouldn't dare, or attacking corners in ways that feel strange at first. But once you find it, it will click. Right now, you're forcing the pen to write when your hand doesn't know the shape of the letters. The only way to make it natural is to write them again and again until they feel like they've always been yours." Hamilton's gaze shifted, finally meeting Leclerc's with a mix of frustration and reluctant acknowledgement. His breathing slowed slightly, though the tension in his shoulders refused to leave. Outside, the muted roar of mechanics working on the cars filled the air, the smell of fuel and scorched rubber seeping into the room. The reality was unspoken but undeniable. The season wasn't waiting, the paddock's whispers weren't fading, and every lap between now and his breakthrough would either cement his struggle or ignite his comeback. And somewhere deep down, both men knew that when that moment came, it wouldn't just be about adapting, it would be about redefining what it meant to be Lewis Hamilton in red. Hamilton could feel the polite tone in the reassurances being offered to him, but beneath that thin veil of diplomacy, he could see the truth in stark clarity. The political turbulence inside Ferrari was building into something far more dangerous than anyone dared to say aloud. The tension in Maranello was no longer just a background hum. It had hardened into a suffocating presence that followed him from the paddock to the simulator to the quiet corridors of the factory. Fred Vasseur, who had risked significant political capital to lure him from Mercedes, was now fighting to keep his own position intact, crushed between loyalty to the driver he had championed and the relentless demands of Ferrari's senior leadership, who were singularly fixated on ending their Constructors' Championship drought. Every conversation seemed to have a shadow, every strategic meeting felt like a test, and every smile carried a hint of calculation. Inside the team's engineering offices, there was a noticeable shift. The enthusiasm that had greeted Hamilton's signing had been replaced by quiet skepticism, muttered questions about whether the disruption to Ferrari's established dynamic had been worth it. The idea of a settling-in period, once embraced as a necessary process, was now being weaponized as a criticism. Performance data was scrutinized with a harsher tone. Telemetry comparisons between him and Charles Leclerc quietly passed around to illustrate the widening gap. That gap, growing with each race, was more than a statistic. It was becoming an unspoken indictment of his place in the team. Mechanics who once stayed late to fine-tune his setup now left at the standard hour. Some avoided eye contact altogether. The whispers didn't stay internal. In the espresso bars near the Maranello gates, workers spoke in low voices about how Leclerc was consistently bringing home the bigger points haul, about how the Tifosi's patience was wearing thin. Italian sports dailies ran headlines dripping with implication, bolstered by selective leaks from unnamed sources close to the team. Stories began to portray Hamilton not as a champion finding his footing, but as an outsider unable, or unwilling, to mold himself to Ferrari's identity. Words like misalignment and cultural disconnect appeared in print. The narrative took root that his Mercedes-honed methods were clashing with the deeply ingrained rituals of Ferrari's racing DNA. Hungary was the spark that set the bridge ablaze. The weekend had been difficult from the outset, setup issues in practice, strategy indecision in qualifying, and the race itself left him stranded outside the top six again. But it was the post-race debrief that delivered the decisive blow. In a room thick with exhaustion and quiet frustration, a senior voice, calm but merciless, told him, "If results don't change soon, we will need to evaluate all options." The sentence was deliberate, stripped of emotion, and it cut deeper than any public criticism ever could. For a driver whose name was etched across the sports record books, it felt like being dismissed as expendable. He left that meeting with no doubt. The chapter with Ferrari was over in every way that mattered. From that moment on, his focus shifted entirely to what came next. The opportunity presented itself with stunning speed. Christian Horner's abrupt and controversial exit from Red Bull had sent shockwaves through the paddock. 4 years, Horner had been the architect of the team's dominance, but his departure did more than leave a leadership vacuum. It freed a significant amount of budgetary capacity. With the cost cap always a limiting factor, Red Bull had rarely been in a position to sign a superstar without gutting other resources. Now, with Horner's salary and related contractual commitments gone, the team suddenly had the financial latitude to make an aggressive play for the sport's biggest names. And then came the rumor that electrified the paddock. Max Verstappen, the driver around whom the entire Red Bull machine had been built, had allegedly told top management he intended to leave after the current season. The whispers were consistent, coming from multiple corners of the paddock, each carrying the same message: the reigning champion's future lay elsewhere. If true, it meant Red Bull was staring down the prospect of reinventing itself from the ground up in 2026, and that reality opened the door to something almost unthinkable: Lewis Hamilton in a Red Bull seat. For Hamilton, it wasn't just an escape, it was a chance to ignite the final act of his career on his own terms. The risks were enormous, stepping into an environment shaped entirely around Verstappen's preferences, adapting to a radically different chassis philosophy, walking into a team bracing for internal upheaval. But the upside was irresistible. He could prove that he was still capable of fighting for championships, not as a nostalgia act but as a living, breathing threat to anyone on the grid. Behind closed doors, his representatives began working with the precision of a covert operation. Initial conversations with Red Bull's senior figures were cautious, exploratory. But once both sides recognized the scale of what was possible, negotiations became intense. Discussions covered not just money, but technical input, simulator access, and the potential for Hamilton to play a key role in shaping Red Bull's 2026 car to fit the new regulations. For Red Bull, the appeal was obvious. Pairing Hamilton's global brand and experience with their engineering could keep them at the top even in a post-Verstappen era. In the paddock, the idea spread like wildfire. Journalists speculated, rival team bosses watched nervously, and Ferrari's leadership, though silent publicly, scrambled behind the scenes to assess the damage. What had started as quiet political erosion in Maranello was now transforming into one of the most sensational moves in Formula One history, a transfer that could not only rewrite the competitive order, but also redefine the legacy of one of the sport's most celebrated champions. And Hamilton, aware of every camera flash, every rumor, and every whisper in the corridors, was no longer looking back. He was already planning the strike that would silence every doubt, not with words, but with victories. The clandestine talks between Lewis Hamilton's closest advisors and Red Bull's top brass unfolded with a precision and intensity more akin to a covert operation than a sports negotiation. Every stage of the process was wrapped in layers of secrecy: pseudonyms on guest lists, private dinners in off-the-map estates, encrypted video calls routed through multiple secure servers, and meetings timed to coincide with unrelated public appearances to avoid raising suspicion. Both parties knew they were navigating a moment that could rewrite the competitive hierarchy of Formula One. Red Bull wasn't simply chasing a star driver. They were pursuing the most decorated competitor in the modern era, a figure whose presence could elevate every aspect of their program, from engineering morale to global brand power. For Hamilton, it was an escape hatch from the suffocating constraints he had grown tired of at Ferrari, a way to place himself at the heart of a machine built for nothing but winning, free from the corporate entanglements that had slowed his progress in Italy. The offer they crafted went far beyond the conventional boundaries of a driver contract. The financial side was staggering, rumored to surpass any base salary currently on the grid, but it was the authority that caught Hamilton's attention. Red Bull laid out a blueprint where he would be embedded in the DNA of their 2026 project, which was already deep in development under the incoming regulation set. They wanted him in the earliest technical briefings, influencing aerodynamic architecture, simulator development cycles, and even the ergonomics of the cockpit. He would have veto power over certain design decisions, the ability to fast-track component testing, and direct access to the engine department to tailor power delivery to his exact driving style. Insiders hinted that weeks before the final signatures were exchanged, Hamilton had already sat in a mocked-up 2026 chassis at a secure Milton Keynes facility, giving live feedback on pedal sensitivity, steering resistance, and visibility from the new halo configuration. What tipped the scales was the operational philosophy. At Red Bull, there was no patience for layers of internal politics or slow-moving committees. Decisions that could gain a tenth of a second on track were made overnight, tested within days, and, if proven, implemented before the next race. At Ferrari, Hamilton had battled a web of conflicting interests: a marketing division wary of risk, a technical team cautious to protect resources, and executives who often prioritized long-term optics over immediate gains. Development plans were sometimes diluted or postponed until the opportunity window had closed. Red Bull's pitch was the antithesis of that culture: direct, decisive, and singularly focused on speed. When the final agreement was secured, the ripple effect was immediate and explosive. The announcement was so well protected that even certain senior members of Red Bull's chassis department learned about it only moments before the public did. Ferrari's statement, brief to the point of coldness, thanked Hamilton for his service and wished him success in future challenges. It was devoid of emotional resonance and read like a formal dismissal rather than a heartfelt farewell. The absence of any personal acknowledgement from Frederick Vasseur was glaring. Sources close to the team revealed that the two had barely communicated outside of race weekends for months, their professional relationship reduced to scheduled debriefs and scripted press interactions. Red Bull's reveal was pure theater. Across every social media platform, they unleashed a perfectly choreographed teaser: the hum of fluorescent lights over a darkened garage, the distinct rasp of a hybrid power unit rising through the revs, and a figure walking toward the camera, helmet under arm, visor catching the light just enough to betray familiarity. The clip cut to black and a single line flashed in metallic red. The next chapter begins. Within an hour, it had broken engagement records, sparked tens of thousands of fan edits, and triggered heated debates among pundits about what this meant for Max Verstappen's long-term position in the team. The shift in atmosphere at the following race weekend was impossible to ignore. In Ferrari's garage, Hamilton moved with quiet detachment, answering technical questions with precision but no warmth, avoiding unnecessary chatter, and spending more time than usual in the driver's lounge between sessions. Engineers described his focus as surgical but emotionally distant, as though his mind was already processing setups and strategies for a car painted in blue rather than red. Meanwhile, in the Red Bull camp, the mood was electric. Department heads were already scheduling integration briefings for the winter, simulator technicians were calibrating settings to replicate Hamilton's driving inputs, and strategy analysts were running models to see how his racecraft could be paired with Verstappen's aggression to form a two-pronged championship assault. Whispers began circulating about private visits Hamilton had made to Red Bull's restricted R&D wing, nicknamed the Vault by insiders, where next-generation components were tested under strict NDA protocols. Some claimed he had already been fitted for team-branded race gear months in advance, while others insisted he had contributed feedback on experimental suspension concepts designed to exploit potential loopholes in the 2026 Aero regulations. Rivals were rattled, not just by the signing itself, but by the possibility that Hamilton's insight could accelerate Red Bull's adaptation to the new era faster than any other team. It wasn't just a signing, it was a declaration. A collision of raw ambition and technical firepower. A realignment of the sport's power map that could echo for seasons. And as the speculation intensified, one truth became clear. The countdown to the Hamilton-Red Bull era had already begun, and it promised to be nothing short of explosive. The Formula One world is bracing for a season that feels less like a continuation of the calendar and more like a complete rewriting of the sport's competitive order. Lewis Hamilton, a driver whose name has long been synonymous with precision, resilience, and relentless ambition, is about to strap himself into the cockpit of the most feared machine in modern racing, a Red Bull that has carved its dominance into the DNA of the championship. But the real jolt comes from the possibility that Max Verstappen, the man who has made this car his personal kingdom, might not be there to defend it. That single variable transforms the grid into a battlefield with shifting alliances, unsettled strategies, and an air of unpredictability that hasn't been felt in years. Suddenly, Hamilton is not just switching teams. He's stepping into the eye of a storm where performance, politics, and legacy will collide with unprecedented force. For Hamilton, this isn't a comfortable late-career glide, it's a leap into the fire. His years at Ferrari, intended to be a triumphant union of legend and legacy, became a grueling test of endurance. The dream of standing atop the podium draped in scarlet turned into a series of gut-wrenching disappointments, mechanical fragility, and tactical errors that eroded entire campaigns. Inside the corridors of Maranello, he battled not only the stopwatch but the invisible weight of tradition, internal rivalries, and the grinding frustration of unrealized potential. Those years left their mark, but they also sharpened him in ways that no dominant streak ever could. They taught him to survive on scraps of opportunity, to adapt his driving style to machinery that rarely matched his ambition, and to channel frustration into focus. That hard-earned adaptability is now being fused with the raw, unmatched capability of a Red Bull car, a pairing that could be devastating for anyone in his way. Behind Red Bull's glass doors, the ripple effect of his arrival is already reshaping the team's ecosystem. Engineers accustomed to tailoring every micro-adjustment to Verstappen's aggressive approach are now dissecting Hamilton's feedback, analyzing his meticulous throttle modulation, tire preservation instincts, and ability to sustain pace over long runs without sacrificing tire life. Adrian Newey's aerodynamic brilliance will now be channeled toward maximizing Hamilton's surgical racecraft, crafting a car not just for domination in clean air but for precision strikes in the chaos of the pack. The atmosphere is charged, not just with technical ambition, but with the awareness that this is a cultural shift. Hamilton's style of leadership, his media presence, and his ability to command loyalty from key personnel will be tested in a team that thrives on internal competition and sharp edges. For the rest of the grid, this is a nightmare scenario. Rivals who once built their race day strategies around defending from Verstappen must now prepare for a different type of threat, one that combines methodical calculation with an unshakable instinct for attack. Hamilton's ability to read the ebb and flow of a race is unparalleled. He knows when to wait in the slipstream, when to force a mistake, and when to strike with clinical precision. Every time he appears in a rival's mirrors, the psychological pressure will intensify, because they know that Hamilton doesn't just hunt positions, he dismantles opponents' confidence. That mental edge, magnified by a car of this caliber, could warp the championship dynamic before the first checkered flag even falls. Outside the cockpit, the political theater will be unmissable. Red Bull's leadership thrives on mind games, strategic leaks, and calculated soundbites that can destabilize rivals or even unsettle their own camp to keep it sharp. Hamilton, accustomed to Mercedes' corporate diplomacy and Ferrari's traditionalist pride, will now be in a team where open confrontation is part of the DNA. Every press conference could turn into a battle of narratives. Every sideways glance in the garage could become a viral talking point. Every radio exchange will be dissected for signs of tension or alliance. The media will seize on any perceived crack, while fans will fuel the fire with speculation that will swirl across every corner of the internet. Yet beneath the headlines and speculation lies the heart of the story, a champion unwilling to fade quietly into the sport's rearview mirror. This is not about survival, it's about conquest. Hamilton knows that if he can take the Red Bull and bend it to his style, if he can dominate in the very seat that became Verstappen's throne, it will be one of the most definitive statements in Formula One history. The narrative that his success was purely the product of Mercedes engineering will shatter. It will prove that his greatness is portable, adaptable, and forged from something far deeper than machinery. And for the fans, the excitement isn't just about the wins to come, it's about the sense that, at any given race, something historic could unfold. If you want, I can now weave in completely new fictional preseason developments, like Hamilton secretly testing a radical Red Bull setup in Bahrain, whispers of Verstappen advising rival teams from the shadows, or tense exchanges between Hamilton and Horner to make the drama and engagement skyrocket. That would make it feel like you're living inside the F1 paddock itself.